social restrictions to be eased, possibly from this weekend, what are the implications for workplaces? Let's go live to the ACTU Secretary Sally McManus. Thanks so much for your time. What sort of measures do you want put in place, the perspective of work, health and safety? What measures should be implemented to protect workers?
Well, the first thing is we've got to recognise it's not going to be business as usual when workplaces open. It means that we're going to have to put in place the most effective way of limiting the spread of the virus while the virus still exists, and that's social distancing. So that's going to mean a whole lot of changes at workplaces. And what we think needs to happen is our workplace laws need to be strengthened and, updated to cope with the pandemic. So having a regulation that allows, strong enforcement of social distancing. So it's not just left up to individual employers, because where we see that happen, as we have unfortunately in the abattoir, that can lead to outbreaks. And we really don't want to undo all the good work that people have put into the last 6 weeks.
So what lessons can be learned from the experience of that Cedar Meats in Melbourne?
Well, the other big issue it highlights is most of those workers are labour hire workers. So that means they're casual workers with no sick leave. And when you're in that situation and you've got a tiny symptom, so maybe a bit of a sore throat, you're likely to still go to work because you know the consequences of not doing so is not getting paid. And so one of the things we really need, because 1 in 3 workers are casual workers, is paid leave for workers to go get tested and then to isolate if they need to. If we have that type of support, that's what's needed, because we've got to do everything we can to encourage testing and to encourage people to stay at home should they have been exposed to the virus.
And for employers, you're arguing there should be a compulsory notification to authorities of any illness detected on their site.
Yeah, that's the third thing we think needs to happen, and that's really important, and it should be uniform across the country. So in the case of the abattoir or anywhere else, once you notify the authorities, they can immediately spring into action to make sure that there's all the contact tracing, there's a proper cleaning, there's all the protocols in place, like a rapid action. At the moment, that's not the case across the country, it's not the case. And so every single day that's delayed when you know that there's been an infection is, more cases that are going to be spread. So it's just a sensible, straightforward thing that should happen.
And when we talk about the social distancing, obviously it didn't happen at the meatworks. What other workplaces are you most worried about? I guess hospitality is a big one, but we're hearing from the AHA, from the restaurant and caterers. They are putting forward, they're being proactive and saying, look, we will put these various measures in place, hygiene staff on shifts. Are they the sorts of things that you're encouraged by?
Look, that's absolutely right. And some industries are doing exactly what you talk about. They're getting together as an industry. They're saying, OK, we've got to implement social distancing. How will that work? And then coming up with protocols that will operate everywhere. And if you don't do that, what will happen is, because there's competitive tensions between companies, some will do it and some won't. And that's certainly the case in places like meatworks, where they're competing against each other. And if you implement social distancing, it means you're going to have to slow down production. It should be the case where they all have to implement the same social distancing. And yes, everyone's production might slow down, but it's much, much more important to save lives and to stop the spread of the virus. And for those companies that do have a virus outbreak, the whole place has to shut down.
Yeah, that's, of course, the number one priority, because if we have further shutdowns and it has a greater economic impact, what are your hopes now in terms of this plan the Prime Minister talks about? Our next curve is we have to get 1 million people back to work. How realistic is that, do you think? Can it be done? And how important is this JobKeeper initiative, which is starting today, incidentally, the payments start today, in trying to achieve exactly what the Prime Minister is talking about?
Well, JobKeeper is really important because it's keeping people connected to their employer during the time that they've been stood down. So That's, over 1 million workers who are connected to their employers. So when their employer is ready to start up and the experts say that's okay, they don't have to rehire workers, they're ready to go. So that's really, really important. The other thing is to reflect on is that at the beginning of this pandemic, we were sort of behind the rest of the world. We were watching the rest of the world cope with the medical tragedy that was happening, and it gave us time to work out what to do. And we made a lot of really good decisions as a country then. It's sort of reversed now. We're like at the front of the queue with New Zealand, making decisions about how do we open up and not have a second wave. And I just say this, we've got a couple of weeks to put in place things that will make sure we get it right, making sure workers get paid pandemic leave, putting in place really strong regulations for the coronavirus for health and safety, and the automatic notification are 3 things we can do to make sure that we're putting ourselves in the best place possible to keep the virus at really low numbers.
You've had a constructive working relationship in these recent months with the Morrison Government. Are you surprised by how well you have been able to do that, particularly with Christian Porter in terms of his role? And can it be used as the basis for a longer-term reform agreement between the ACTU and the coalition?
Well, I think I know we've had a really common purpose. So both the union movement and the government, myself and Christian Porter, have been focused on doing what we need to do to save lives, to save jobs, and to save the income of working people. And so where you've got a common purpose and you've got, 2 groups coming together, you can achieve really good things. In terms of going forward, well, of course, we're willing to keep working with the government because we've got to see Australians come out of this and, get jobs back again. Like, that's just so critical. We are not convinced and do not believe that some of the agendas that have been put forward by some employers, which were basically about cutting wages, are the right thing to do. In fact, we know it's not the right thing to do. Where you do that and you have a downturn, it actually makes it much worse. And so we're interested in looking at the bigger picture around what our country needs to do in terms of improving productivity. For example, skills. Skills is critically important. We don't have a broader skills base. Our young people, we need to invest so much more in them in terms of the TAFE system. All of those things are things we want to look at. Also, we think this pandemic has really exposed just how many insecure jobs we've got and that it's gone too far in our country. And we'd like to have constructive discussions with employers and with the government to see if they agree with that, and if they do, what we can do about it.